Good evening, everyone. I'm Meg Olson, the Grassroots Mobilization Director here at NEWORK. I am so glad that you've decided to spend some time with us this evening to take a brief look back at 2023 and understand how this informs our work in 2024. So I am delighted that you are here for our very first webinar of 2024. And as my colleagues just reminded me, our first public discussion about our election work for this year. Choosing community over chaos, our work in 2024. Tonight, you will get a preview of our election work, and in particular, some of our top-line messaging, and you will get to see our 2024 Equally Sacred checklist. But before we dive into the material and you hear from my wonderful colleagues, we're going to do a little tech housekeeping. We do have closed captioning, if you would find that helpful. I will warn you, the captions are automatically generated, so there will be a few mistakes. Towards the end of the webinar, we'll have time for Q&A. So please, throughout the webinar, type your questions into the Q&A box because that's easier for us to track. We may not get to everyone's questions, and this Q&A box provides us with your name and email, which will allow us to respond to you later in the week. And again, please feel free to type the questions as they come to your mind during the webinar. That helps us as well. For our time together tonight, we will first hear about what's at stake in 2024 and about NEWORK's response. And we'll take a look back on this past year, both in Congress and in the administration. Then we will pivot to the primary focus of our work in 2024, the election. You will hear some of the top lines of our equally sacred Catholic multi-issue voter messaging and hear about what issues we are going to focus on this election and how we chose them. And I'm very excited to say that you on the webinar tonight are the very first people to see our 2024 Equally Sacred checklist. You will then hear about how you can take action with us over the next few months. And of course, as I said, we'll have time for Q&A. And now it is my great pleasure. Oh, excuse me. I'm so sorry I didn't introduce our panelists. We first have Mary Novak, our Executive Director. Then Laura Peralta Schulte, our Senior Director of Public Policy and Government Relations. Jared K. Smith, our Senior Government Relations Advocate. Colin Martinez-Longmore, our Communications and Social Media Coordinator. And Catherine Gillette, our Senior Grassroots Mobilization Organizer. And now I am so delighted to pass it off to my colleague, Mary Novak.
Thank you, Meg, so much. Good evening, friends. It is truly my honor to welcome you this evening. How good it is that we can be here together in community. And I want to thank all 1,000 of you who registered for this webinar. So foundational to tonight's webinar is that we all should enjoy similar things. The freedom to care for ourselves and our family, the freedom to be healthy, the freedom to live on a healthy planet, the freedom from harm, the freedom to participate in a vibrant democracy, and the freedom to live in a welcoming country that values the dignity and human rights of all. These are the values we share. We share them as Catholic justice seekers, as well as people of goodwill. And all of us in the NEWORK community have made great strides in realizing these values as we have together educated, organized, and lobbied for the Build a New policy agenda that the NEWORK community embraced starting in 2021. We also came to this space in the footsteps of the Catholic sisters who founded NEWORK in 1972. Their values are still our values today, as we recently learned when we were delving into NEWORK's archives. NEWORK's 1976 election guide said this, and I quote, "We call this year a test of our democratic institutions because increasing numbers of fellow citizens regard our political institutions and electoral process with indifference and even disgust," unquote. Now, while that was true then, it is true today by at least an order of magnitude. So because of that, we have gathered tonight to learn what it means to be intentional in choosing community over chaos. A line that NEWORK borrows from the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who asked shortly before his assassination, "Where do we go from here? Chaos or community?" Now, those who choose chaos push a vision of the future that belongs only to the rich and powerful, and everyone else is left to suffer in the fallout of a world robbed of these basic freedoms. We have seen in our politics that path of chaos laid out in mangled detail. For example, it is the path of threatening cuts to human needs programs, healthcare, housing, and nutrition. Why? The rich and powerful are trying to rob the communities served by those programs. They are trying to rob them of the belief that our government can and should deliver those programs. In other words, that our democracy is worth having and that it serves the common good. Another example of this path of chaos is the refusal to adequately support the humanitarian infrastructure at our border, and then railing against the inevitable problems this lack of support causes. And in both cases of chaos that I've mentioned, it is always the most vulnerable and marginalized of our neighbors who get harmed. We gather here because we believe this cynical path is not inevitable. We all believe that we can persist down a path of building a future that includes everyone. As Pope Francis said last year in Lisbon, todos, todos, todos. Do we dare to imagine what is entailed in living out that dream? Can we free our minds from the punishing confines of our politics today? Can we look up to the far horizon, which actually is not so far off as we have been made to think? When people of faith talk about freedom, that is how major change making occurs in this country. We saw this with Dr. King, whose legacy we honor with the name of this webinar, and whom we remember with gratitude during Black History Month. As one of his children recently said, "It is now time for action, not just dreaming. And we will act together in community as we make truly fate-filled decisions later this year." We've been here before as a community and as a country, and we have met that challenge, and we can overcome it. Our success is in our hands, and it is up to us to finish building anew. So I would now like to turn you over to my colleague, Laura Peralta Schulte.
Mary, that is the inspiration I needed in terms of beginning today. And as always, it is so wonderful to be gathered with the folks that really make our agenda happen. And that is you who came to the webinar tonight. So great gratitude. I just could not start tonight with what happened in 2023, because I think that gives us the wrong impression of the power of change that is in our hands. So I want to start tonight with the 117th Congress. just to remind everybody on this webinar of the historic wins that we helped achieve for the common good. What did we do? We significantly expanded healthcare and made drugs at a price point that people can actually afford to pay. We created in the infrastructure and the Inflation Reduction Act green incentives to tackle climate change, the biggest program yet that the United States has undertaken. We helped pass the infrastructure bill that meant jobs, good jobs at living wages. Fundamentally for NEWORK, we also reduced child poverty by 50% with a historic monthly, fully refundable child tax credit, while at the same time making sure that the wealthiest in our country began to pay the tax they owe. It's with that in mind that we pivot to 2023 last year with the 118th Congress. And it is really with this in mind that we come to you tonight talking about the issues we are, because it is a contrast in a way forward. So when we think about the 118th Congress, it has widely been regarded as one of the most unproductive Congresses in modern history. Particularly when you look at the House, what do you see? You see immediate chaos and crisis, our government moving from one crisis to the other. Recall in January of 23, when the House Republicans went to pick a speaker, Kevin McCarthy, it took 15 votes, 4 days of discussions in terms of getting a speaker. All the while, Speaker McCarthy had to give away his power to folks in his caucus that really prefer chaos over community. When we pivoted to the acts of Congress that had to happen, the must-pass bills, here again, we saw Congress play out. It started out with the debt ceiling bill to extend the U.S. government's borrowing limit. It moved on then to 2 short-term extensions of funding to keep the government open. You'll recall after the final, the second of the 2 extensions, Speaker McCarthy was fired by his caucus, and it took 3 weeks to replace him with Speaker Mike Johnson, who was a very, very close ally with former President Trump. Adding on to the just very lack of movement forward from a legislative standpoint, you had the 118th Congress with a real strong pivot in January towards the 2024 election. What was it based on? Impeachment and keeping the border front and center. So immediately we saw an impeachment inquiry into Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. Later on in the year, we saw an impeachment inquiry into President Biden. And you all know, as well as I do, that you have been calling your members of Congress, trying to keep members of both houses off of bad border bills, because this is about setting the framework for the election and not for governing. All the while, I just want to kind of contrast what was happening on the Hill with what was happening in the administration. So you had the Biden administration very focused on executive action. While Congress was busy playing in their sandbox, the administration tried to move forward as best they can on many of our objectives in the Build a New Agenda. You saw executive action to protect seniors in nursing homes by expanding the number of folks that serve in those homes. You saw action to stop junk fees in things like healthcare, banking, and airlines. You saw actions, including one today, to expand student debt relief. You saw executive action for mothers with infants to be able to have access to maternal health supports. What you're seeing, when you look at the 117th, and you look at the 118th across the board, is what we think is a very stark choice as we head into 2024. There is a opportunity that Mary was talking about in her opening remarks to finish the job of building anew. And what does that mean? That means a multiracial, inclusive democracy so all can thrive, where the rich pay their fair share and where programs like WIC get what they need for infants and babies. Or there's the opportunity to continually see democracy falter. We will see tax cuts for the rich. We will see continued program cuts to things like Social Security, to Medicare, to Medicaid, to SNAP, the things that help people stay above water and thrive. That is why we're coming to you today. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Colin Martinez Longmore, who's going to talk a little bit about the way that we vote as Catholics. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you so much, Laura. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon or good evening. Very good to be with you all. As Laura painted so vividly, there really are some dire stakes at hand. The chaos of the last Congress really reminds us of what we all know to be true, that who we elect matters. Electing people who share our values is absolutely crucial if we want to build that society where everyone can thrive and not just a select privileged few can thrive. That world is possible, though. We've seen it before. And our goal is to shift our focus to what's ahead to be able to accomplish that once again. And that's looking at the 2024 election that's coming up. So as we get into this, what I want to do real quick is invite you to reflect on your own where you are. As we look to the 2024 election, what are some issues that are important to you? What are policies that come to mind when you think of this election that are paramount, that are top of mind? And when you think of what those are, you'll probably notice that multiple issues will come to mind. It's not just one. And the truth is that there are many issues that are important to us, and they all do matter in many different ways. However, around election time, there's usually a tendency, and it usually comes from certain faith leaders and certain people in politics that try to force people to create a hierarchy of policy issues that voters should consider, as if one is more important than the other, and we should only focus on that one issue. That, of course, is known as single issue voting. And single issue voting is a tactic that's used to distract and to divide folks who make them disregard certain issues for others. But what we know is that it is immoral to allow a single issue that a candidate holds or that we see on our ballot, and to allow that single issue to outweigh other positions that could harm vulnerable folks in our communities. Think of asylum seekers, of low-income families, the environment, other marginalized communities that we are all a part of as well. Focusing on a single issue, it allows other social sins, like those issues that we're thinking of for this upcoming election. It allows some of those problems to just continue to grow unchecked. Think of environmental destruction, economic exploitation, harm to migrants, racism in our systems, and so much more. So that's why, as people of faith, we must reject what single issue voting, the messaging when we hear that. And we have to listen to our consciousness and embrace a more expansive and inclusive agenda, rather than one that is narrow and that excludes and disregards people. In recent years, Pope Francis, echoing hundreds of years of church teaching, has spoken very clearly and forcefully about those demands that face people of goodwill and Catholics in the public sphere. So, based on and inspired on those teachings of Pope Francis and Catholic social teaching, we developed our Equally Sacred framework, which invites and calls us to position ourselves with those who are marginalized and those who have the least power in our society. As Pope Francis talks about in Gaudete et Exsultate, that we cannot uphold an ideal of holiness that would ignore injustices in the world. So when we look at what an equally sacred framework does, it calls us to live multi-issue lives. And it's important to live out, it's important to be multi-issue voters because we live multi-issue lives. Just take a second and think about it. The lie of a single issue voting messaging is that we're all individuals that are disconnected from the other issues that affect our brothers and sisters, when in reality, all these things are connected, as Pope Francis shares with us as well. We each hold many different identities. We have connections in different communities. We love people from different backgrounds and experiences that come from different places. And because of that, we have to be diligent about protecting the freedoms that we all want. And it's some of the ones that we've heard already today: the freedom to be healthy, to live in an environment that is clean and healthy as well, to participate in an inclusive democracy, to be free from harm in our homes, in our places of worships, and in our places of education, to take care of ourselves and one's family. In order to take care of all of us, it takes all of us to do it. And that's what our equally sacred framework challenges us and invites us to get into. I'm going to quote Pope Francis from one of his TED Talks in 2017, where he said that the only future worth building is the one that includes everyone. We have the opportunity to do that. We've done it before, and this opportunity this year during this election is right in front of us. We can look out for everyone. We can build a future that includes everyone. And I'm very excited to get into that and to participate in that with you all this year. So with that, we're going to take a bit of a deeper dive into some of these issues and what we're looking at specifically for this year. And I'm going to invite my colleague, Jarrett Smith, to come up and share that.
Thank you so much, Colin. I wanted also welcome each and every one of you to this webinar this evening. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk about the 2024 election and the issues that are important, not just for NEWORK, but for people all around the country. So before we got into, framing the equally sacred, we had to think about what are the issues that are important to people. What makes NEWORK very unique is we talk to secular and faith groups. So we did a lot of listening and tried to discern the issues that people are thinking about around the country. What we know is that a record number of people are struggling to put food on their tables and earn a living to support their families. And you will see that the issues that we were able to come up with reflect that statement. These are pocketbook issues. These are kitchen table issues. Folks are talking about these issues each and every day when they wake up and when they go to bed. Next slide, please. So we looked at freedom to participate in a vibrant democracy. And what does that mean? That means making sure that you have the resources for things like healthcare. People are very concerned with the cost of housing and paying their rent. Availability of very good jobs is something that people are thinking about. And this is primarily for young people, those that are 18 to 39. And also gun violence. Inflation is something that you would think that young people would not even really understand, but it is something that is really important to them, because once they are getting into this workforce, finishing up college, they are finding that the jobs that they may have heard about, promised that were available when they started school, not so much now when they've entered the workforce. this is all part of what makes a vibrant democracy, being able to um, uh, participate in these freedoms that we take for granted in this country. I think that what we are trying to see in this election is almost like a second founding. What we saw in 1866. We're trying to go back to that and give people an opportunity to really look at the things that are important to them, the things that are holding them back, that they believe are holding them back economically, and finding a way that we can make sure that we can care for all our families and ourselves so we can put food on the table, that we can make sure that we live in a safe community, that there aren't any questions about paying for your rent or buying a house, and making sure that your income is a livable income, that in a country with as many resources as we have, that there aren't any people suffering. Next slide, please. Freedom from harm. That is, I think, something that you can't escape now in this country. You turn on the TV and you see something, whether it's a mass shooting or some other type of incident that has occurred. We know that we can do better. We can change legislation in this country so that people aren't worrying about just going to celebrate their favorite team that won the Super Bowl. Um, those are issues that, whether you are young or old, Black, white, uh, Latinx, or our Asian brothers and sisters, those are issues, especially when it comes to harm, that people are thinking about, that are really top of mind. We all want to see a welcoming community that values dignity and human rights. And that means that all of us need to make sure that we welcome the stranger, that immigration and border policy is something that takes care of all those people that are seeking refuge here in this country. There's more than enough resources here that we can take care of everyone. Um, we cannot accept that scarcity is really, something that is happening here in America. Scarcity is a lie, and we should call it out. There are plenty of resources for all of us. We need to make sure that we understand the freedom to be healthy. We just is very important to all people, whether it's young, whether it's old. We just came through a pandemic. There are other viruses that are, becoming more and more prominent. We need to make sure that people are guaranteed access to health care, whether that's through the ACA, or making sure that when it comes to vaccinations, like for COVID, that we make them free. We make sure that they are provided for anyone that needs that medication. And we need to also make sure that those medications, like that were decreased, like in IRA for insulin, uh, uh, obesity, diabetes, we need to make sure that people have access to these critical medications. Um, Diabetes drugs, that's the start. There are many, many more critical medications that will see severe price cuts in the future. It's something that we as an organization have been advocating for. And then uh, living in a healthy planet. Climate change is something that we are suffering, experiencing all over the country. It doesn't matter if you live in the West Coast, East Coast, the Midwest. The weather patterns are becoming much more severe. It is something that it has to be a priority for all of us. We have to make sure we do everything possible to protect Mother Earth. Next slide, please. And so now I will turn back to my colleague Meg, and she will walk everyone through the Equally Sacred Checklist. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. So you've heard tonight from Mary and Laura and Colin and Jared. I think you heard some really positive language, our freedoms that we are valuing and working on this election season. You heard specific equally sacred messaging from Colin. You just heard about how, we listened to people across the country and our coalition partners about the most important issues this election season, those kitchen table issues. And so now here it is all together, our 2024 Equally Sacred Checklist. And as I said at the beginning, this is our first public debut of this checklist. And each of you, everyone who registered for this webinar, will receive a copy of this in an email tomorrow, along with the recording and some other follow-up materials. So don't think you need to take a screenshot or anything. This will appear in your inbox tomorrow. So we've designed our Equally Sacred Checklist to help Catholics evaluate candidates up and down the ballot. And you can start using it now in preparation for the Super Tuesday primaries on March 5th. You can use this on your own or in groups as you research candidates. And you can also bring it to candidate forums and town halls to ask questions. For example, if you were going to ask a question about our freedoms to care for ourselves and our families, you could ask the candidate, will you ensure that the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes by supporting a billionaire's tax? Or if you were going to ask a question about freedom to live on a healthy planet, you could ask the candidate, will you address the climate crisis and invest in a rapid, just transition to renewable energy? So we really hope that this Equally Sacred Checklist is something that is useful for you. And of course, we want you to share it with your friends, with your family, with your faith community, with anyone you meet who you feel like, hey, let's take a look at our candidates together. Do we know who's on this ballot? Do we know who we're voting for this year? Let's do some research. Let's figure out, what their priorities are. And so this Equally Sacred Checklist is definitely one of our primary documents this election season, and we're just thrilled to have it out so early this year. And with that, I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Catherine Gillette, who's going to talk to you about even more opportunities you can have to participate in this year's election with us.
Thanks also to my colleagues for that wonderful presentation, and thank you to all of you for being here tonight. I hope that you're feeling as energized as I am about our plans for the year ahead. So we just threw a lot of information at you. Where do we go from here? Well, first, I am super excited to announce Informed, Engaged, and Committed, NEWORK's 2024 Election Training Series. It will be an opportunity to join with network advocates and friends from across the country to learn more about being a multi-issue voter, messaging and conversation tactics, and how you can act in concrete ways to engage with the election. We have created 4 brand new trainings for this series, and we encourage you to sign up to experience them all. The training series is going to begin on Tuesday, April 9th, and it's going to last 4 weeks, with a new training being introduced each week and offered multiple times each week. We will be sharing all of the registration links in our follow-up email, so keep an eye out. Plus, my colleague Eilish is she's gonna put week one's registration in the chat now, so you can get a head start on signing up to participate in the training series. But please do be sure to sign up and invite your friends, your family, your parish, your congregation, your social justice group, and anyone else you know who may be interested to join us as well. While you're adding the election training series to your calendar, I have one more opportunity that you'll want to add. On Saturday, April 6th, NEWORK is hosting the 4th installment of White Supremacy in American Christianity, Moving Towards Beloved Community. We are absolutely thrilled to be welcoming back Father Brian Massengale and Dr. Robert P. Jones. The last 3 events were incredibly well received. My teams are still talking about them, and I'm sure that this program is going to be no different. Stay tuned for more information, but get it on your calendar today. Additionally, as Meg mentioned, be sure to share our Equally Sacred checklist with your family, your friends, your community, your parish, everybody. It is a great tool, and we hope that you will help us to get the word out about it. And lastly, did you know that a new book has been published all about the history of NEWORK? It's called Call to Action, NEWORK's 50 Years of Political Ministry, and you can purchase your own copy on Amazon today. It is a wonderful, wonderful text, and I just really encourage everyone to check it out and enjoy. And now I'm going to turn things back over to Meg Olson because I think we've got some time for some questions and answers.
We certainly do. So thanks, Catherine, so much. I'm going to invite all of my colleagues to turn your cameras back on. All right. And we definitely have some questions tonight. So let's see. Ooh, this is a good one. Why is there so much inability in our country to put food on the table and to earn a living wage? Isn't the economy booming? Isn't the jobless rate low? Why is there so much incongruency with this message of record poverty? Who'd like to begin? I think this is a juicy question. I saw lots of eager faces.
Jared, did you want to start on that one?
Sure, Laura. Thank you for the question. I think there was a time in this country that those people that were elected really didn't matter what party you came from, but really came to DC to solve problems, to think about the best way forward for all of us, right? And certain things have happened, whether it's social media, whether it's these mass media, factions, 24-hour, 7-day-a-week news. It has made it very difficult for people to govern and try to actually come up with ideas and policies that solve problems. If you can't get people in a room that represent us all to compromise, and that's what politics is all about, it's going to be very, very difficult to fix things like income inequality, healthcare deficiencies for folks. It's, those are just basic needs that, and housing that no one in this country should even have to contemplate as, how do we solve this? That's why people come to DC as elected officials, to really fix these problems. So we really have to, and this is for everybody, it doesn't matter your party affiliation, it's that you really believe in making things better in this country. It really takes everybody working together, talking to your neighbor, talking to your friends, your family, and trying to find a way and ideas that, actually look at what would, make people's lives better. And that starts at home with all of us. And it's something that it's a practice that we have to do every day. You can't stop. You have to find a way to talk to people that do not, naturally agree with you, and find a way that you can work on these big issues.
Thanks, Jarrett. All right. Pivoting. We know that there are many legislators on both sides of the aisle who agree on many of NEWORK's positions and priorities. But there are those who have been afraid to vote their conscience and have been persuaded that doing so will result in them being run out of office. What can we do to change this equation?
So you're talking about political courage, Meg, of which there is little, but can I just say it is growing. So at the beginning of the 118th Congress in the first session, I think that was very true. You had a very noisy group of members in the Freedom Caucus that they are the for lack of a better term, the chaos makers. Very frankly aligned with former President Trump, who for many reasons, I think this really goes to where Mary started us out, for many reasons don't want democracy to work, because frankly, many of them are looking at a more authoritarian system to replace it. I think when you look at the members in certain states, in New York, in California, where they are purple seats, you had an initial reticence to stand up because the party structure, particularly in the House, is all about leadership. So there was a fear of leadership. What I just want to report is Jarrett and I spent more time with those members last year and continued to spend more time with them this year because they are quietly starting to find their voices. Why? Because they are actually accountable to districts where people like you all on this webinar are saying, hey, you know what? I think we should pass something called the child tax credit. I think we should fund WIC. I think we actually need affordable housing. So I just want to give credit to the folks on the webinar. They are finding political courage because of your work. It's your work. Yes, in fact, Jarrett and I are, have their staff on speed dial because, that is our job. But that's not what's changing it. It's you all. So if we want to change, you are the answer. And again, we have to choose a vision for the future, a vision that Mary laid out, frankly, at the beginning. We've got to choose community over maybe comfort. So this is not that you all are not the crowd that chooses comfort, but we really want to encourage you to get engaged in the election work, because ultimately, if the stars don't align and we're heading into the 119th Congress with a different president and perhaps a different configuration in the Senate, Build Anew has no future. That's what we're talking about. The stark differences we're talking about is function over community. In the most basic way, we should not be debating whether WIC gets support from members. That has always been bipartisan, and that's at the level that we're at, Meg. So thank you for the question, and we can go to the next one.
If I can add on to that as well, Laura, because I think what you mentioned at the beginning is so important, how, and we saw in the last session of Congress, that it really is just a small, very vocal extremist group that hold many people almost hostage. But when more people start getting their voice involved, the politicians can find the courage to recognize, actually, I'm hearing voices I haven't heard before. Maybe it's young people that are getting involved and making their voices heard. Like this past summer, seeing the summer of strikes, and folks like Sean Fain at the United Auto Workers saying like, hey, there's we have an end to, like, record profits, but there's no wages going up, right? Kind of to answer that first question as well. When more people start making their voice heard, like we saw over the summer, like we've been seeing with so many young people nowadays as well, it starts to give folks courage because they recognize that that small vocal extremist few doesn't have the power when everyone else starts making that voice. But it does take all of us speaking together, which I'm so glad that this is a group that is willing to do that and to talk with others to get them activated as well.
And let me just add to that, that yes, we are talking to people who get what we mean, right? You are the people in the network community, but it can't be just us. That is why the trainings are so important that Catherine laid out, because we need you to go out and work with the larger communities where you live, to really get folks to get out, to understand how critical this election is, and to get them out to vote. It's absolutely critical because who we elect absolutely matters. Network's been saying that for years, but I think it could not be more true today.
No, thanks so much, everyone. And I think we've addressed a few questions here as I'm looking through them. Any feelings about what everyone here today can do to address fear that is out there about this election, about the state of our country? What can we do? I see heads nodding. Who'd like to start?
I'm happy to start, and then I want to kick it over to my colleagues. I don't think I'm speaking out of school when I say that we started really looking at this 2024 election last year in a very significant way. And we did the analysis. And I think to a person in our community here in Washington and our hybrid colleagues, we got pretty depressed. And we came together as community and started working on what is the plan so that reality, that authoritarian possibility that Laura mentioned, does not become reality. And with community, with prayer, with being together and planning what we're going to be rolling out in the coming months, I have experienced our turn towards hope. And what we realize is that is also what a choice of community over chaos is. Chaos sends us down this road of desolation. And we were seeing the chaos unfolding in front of us last year, day in and day out. I remember talking to Jarrett in the midst of how many days that we were going through the speaker elections, and we were laughing and crying at the same time, right? And so it is in community that we gain hope and stay together. Who would add to that?
Mary, can I just a bit? Fear is a political strategy. This is all about division. That is and the reason I mentioned the border is because you know what? We need a functioning system where if you are seeking asylum, you are met, you have resources, you know, that is a system that we seek. That takes money. That is an investment in our people, whether they're coming to seek asylum or you're giving housing assistance or paid leave. The oldest political strategy in the book is to divide and conquer. So on one day, it's the crime issue. On the next day, it's the border issue. It is the divide and conquer strategy that is so effective, where fear of the other becomes a driving political force. We cannot fall for that. That is not to say there is not some elements that we've got to deal with. We need manageable systems. We need better support for our people. But you know what comes up in 25 is a big fat tax bill. $2 trillion more to the wealthiest people in America is on the line. And so ultimately, it is in the interest of the powerful and the rich to create chaos in our communities so that they can succeed. So I'll just leave that there.
Jump in and say, if you're wondering about how to have these conversations with folks, we've got this really great training series coming up. Informed, Engaged, and Committed Networks 2024 Election Training Series. So definitely sign up for that because we are going to be talking about how to have these tough conversations. It's all going to be right there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm seeing a few questions about engaging young people. I wish we could pluck some of our colleagues out of the audience and just have them pop in. But I'm going to do it about how do we get young people involved in this election. Young people are there. Like, I'm going to give a shout out to our colleagues over at the Ignatian Solidarity Network. I mean, they had this past fall at the Ignatian Family Teach-In a training on how to run a voter registration on your campus, and like people were on fire. And you know, they want to participate. And NEWORK, we are so excited. We are in the midst of led by our beloved colleague Chelsea Puckett. We are finalizing 9 to 10 young adult leaders on college campuses for our program called YAL, Young Advocates Leadership Lab. And this year, in this kickoff year, they're going to be organizing voter registration, deep canvassing, and GoTV efforts on campus. And that's just on, I mean, that's on 10 campuses, and we are thrilled. But we know that work like this is happening all over the US on college campuses and off campuses to engage students and to engage young voters. And I'm quoting Laura here when she reminds me daily that young goes up to age 44 this year in this election when we think about voting patterns. So, you know, I think, honestly, I feel like, you know, colleges have captive audiences. Let's think about how those young, busy parents, what can we do to make sure they have a voting plan, right? Do they have childcare while they go and wait in line, right? I think that's probably the population that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about younger voters this year as well. So, so keep that in mind.
Let me carry
Yeah,
on.
Colin, as a young
Well,
new parent.
yeah, right. No, and I think it was important to mention even the age range that we're talking about, because I do think that when we talk about engaging young voters, it's not about creating like a safe space for young people. It's just about integrating into the same space. So an intergenerational approach is so key. And I think that's what's been so great, especially with what my colleague Chelsea is doing, making sure that we can integrate folks so that there's opportunity for intergenerational engagement. It's what Pope Francis calls us to do. It's ultimately what equally sacred looks like. It's making sure that all these issues are looked at, no matter what age you are. And I think the future would have to be, the only way to get to do it is together. So taking that intergenerational approach and being like, who are the young people that I'm talking to, that I'm mentoring, that I'm providing resources to if they might not have it themselves. So intergenerational all the way.
Thanks so much. All right. I know there's some other good questions here that I will pass along to my colleagues to make sure your questions are answered. But we are going to wrap up tonight, being mindful of our time together. So I just want to thank everyone so much for coming. You know, as Mary said at the beginning, right? We know that the work ahead of us this year is daunting. And we know that NEWORK has been here for over 50 years, engaging in election work and advocacy. And right, as we heard right at the beginning of our time together from Mary, we've been here before as a country. We have met the challenge and we can overcome it. It is ours, success. The success is in our hands. And if we all do our part this election season, we will finish building anew. So thank you so much. There will definitely be more to come as we continue to unveil our election plans. But be sure tomorrow you are going to get this recording, the Equally Sacred checklist that you can start using and sharing. And you will also get the links to register for the election training series that kicks off in April. So stay tuned and stay connected. And thank you so much and have a good night.